Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to back to our second to the last lecture for the semester. Can you believe it? I'm so glad this year is almost over, but again, I'm sorry I can't make it today, but I will be doing the live lectures for next week. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the last chapter, the last section for this semester, special senses. And again, a little review. What are special senses? Why are they so special? Well, remember your five senses you probably learned when you were a kid. So what are your five senses? Well, you probably learned these five senses, right? So like things like sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. But again, thing is that you have general versus special senses. So general senses are those that you can feel throughout your body. And special senses are dedicated to certain areas that are detected by, or special senses are detected by special sensory organs. So again, general senses widespread throughout the body. Special senses, these are specialized and localized to specialized organs. Now again, general senses include all of these we covered earlier, and special senses, so it's all of these five right here. So yes, there are five senses, but not the ones we learned in elementary school. It is a little, not your entire childhood wasn't a lie. Thankfully, four of the senses you probably learned, they are special senses. But instead of touch, which is a general sense and actually can be broken down into multiple other senses, you have equilibration or balance, or sometimes or equilibrioception, sometimes just called equilibrium or just balance. So what are we talking about today? Big hint, we have the eye. So what do we have with the eye? Well, let's talk about the anatomy of the eye for a bit. So what we have here are actually your eyelids. So this is talking about the eye quite yet. We're going to talk about the accessories. So what we have here are your eyelids, also called palpebrae, or palpebra for singular. Now, what do we have here? So again, palpebrae are your eyelids. And then you have this part right here. This that slit between your eyelids, or where you open and close when you blink and open in your eyes. That's called your palpebral fissure. So whenever you see this term palpebrae, it refers to the eyelids. Now what we have here are the eyelids, now seen in cross section. Now we're looking at a sagittal view that's off from the midline. So what we have here are the palpebral conjunctiva, and that's actually the lining between the inner lining of your eyelids and also a lining that's just above and below your eye on this inferior and superior surface, or actually, inferior and superior surfaces. And then you have the bulbar conjunctiva. So that's the part that actually lines your eye. So the palpebral, this is the inner lining of your eyelid, and the bulbar conjunctiva is continuous with that, but this is the part that's actually attached to the eye. Now conjunctivitis, oh, that looks very, well, what do you notice with this conjunctivitis? Notice that this person has very red inflamed eyes, that's why they have the inflammation, but also all this yellow gunk, so that they might be pus, that might be bacteria, that might be dead immune cells, and are also dry mucus secretions as well, and tears. So yeah, what we have here is itis. So again, itis is that suffix, those four magic words that mean inflammation. So that's what we have, inflammation of those linings that are on our inner eyelids, and also the part of the bulbar conjunctiva that also lines part of our eye. So again, itis, inflammation.
Poke at it until you get the right shape.
Now you probably saw this, like, okay, so if you follow Korean culture, you probably, or actually East Asian culture, you might notice that sometimes people get surgery. And what type of surgery do they sometimes get? They might get this type of surgery. And you might have heard this term if you're not familiar with it. So it's colloquially called double or single eyelids. So people who have eyelids like this, sometimes they like the aesthetics of double eyelids. So they actually get surgery to get the eyelids, and it's not coincidental. So this is called, unfortunately, it's not called palpebralplasty. So they use the Greek term for the eyelids. So palpebrae is Latin, blepharon is Greek. I know it's weird how they switch back and forth. But again, this is common. Where do you find a population that has a lot of single eyelids or single eyelids? Well, in East Asia, so Japan, Korea, and China, this is a cosmetic surgery that is not too unusual. And what do they do? Well, it's interesting because here we have Occidental or Western, And here we're looking at East Asian, or cross section of an East Asian eyelid that has that single eyelid. But what you notice is that you have this aponeurosis, this dense connective tissue. So notice that it actually goes up further, or actually more superior in the occidental eyelid. And then if your aponeurosis is closer to this part right here of the eyelid, or closer to the edge of the eyelid, well, when you pull it back, it's not going to have much of an edge. But if you pull this back, it's actually going to leave this fold. So that's what causes that double eyelid. So what do they do in that surgery? Well, it's kind of interesting because what they do is try to actually make artificial aponeuroses that inserts more superior and higher on the eyelid than the person's natural levator aponeurosis. So what they do is do a little suture. They put a little thread there. And yeah, so that's what they do. I mean, it's pretty easy and superficial. They're not actually putting stitches in the eye, just within the eyelid itself. But by doing that, when this person retracts their eyelids, then now they have a new fold where there was very little to none before. Okay, so then there's also more anatomy. So the angles of your eyes. So this part right here, so just like your anatomical directions, medial toward the midline, lateral away from the midline. And there are actually, I found like 3 different names for these angles. So angle or canthus or commissure, they all refer to the same thing, but lateral and medial still applies. So again, if it's your right eye, the lateral is away, and if it's it will be toward the midline if it's the medial, and just reverse the directions if it's on your left eye. Okay, so what we have here is actually not a solid structure, but this hole in your eye, and actually it's not like a hole all the way through. We'll get to more of the inner anatomy of the eyes very soon. This is your pupil, and it is a hole in the iris we see right here. So the iris is the colored part of our eyes, and the pupil is the hole that lets in light through the iris. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to see anything if the iris had no hole in it whatsoever. Light wouldn't be able to get through it. And then you have this. The white of your eyes are called the sclera. And it's very interesting because, well, one thing you can't really see here is this part right here. So notice that the sclera is milky white, but look at the part that's in front and anterior to the iris. It's clear. That's why you can see the pupil. That's why you can see the iris, but that, more importantly, that lets light through. So yeah, what we see here is that we see the pupil, and we actually see that there's actually a ring of tissue around the pupil. So the pupil, compared to the iris, the pupil is a whole. It's not a solid structure. But remember that from the sympathetic and parasympathetic lectures that the pupil can constrict and dilate, so it can grow smaller when it constricts and dilate when it gets bigger. Well, the pupil, or actually let's rewind a bit. So let's talk about the sclera. So then the sclera, let's talk about this. So what do you see? A lot of blood vessels. So again, the sclera, you have a lot of blood supply to your eyes, but you also have a lot of nerves there as well. To recap, so this is the pupil, this is the iris, this is the sclera, the white of your eyes. But there's a structure you can't really see on this picture on the left, and that would be the cornea, or you can't see directly. So the cornea is a clear layer that's continuous with the sclera. So what we see here is that, again, you can't see the reflection off the cornea, but again, the cornea needs to be clear, otherwise you can't let you can't let light through your eye, through your pupil, and onto your retina in the back here. So yeah, the cornea is a clear layer, but it is continuous with the sclera. But remember how the sclera had all those blood vessels? So that's one reason that the sclera is white, because of all the proteins and other things supplied by the blood vessels. But your cornea does not typically have blood vessels. This is why it's able to remain translucent.